Kevin, so I think we already had a panel discussion with Mohan and Alejandro and Alexa, so I'm not going to go very deep into, but quickly, Kelvin, now as an investor, your portfolio, your area of investments, and where do you show interest for the participants?
So just I didn't really go into the kind of companies that we kind of invest in. So broadly, as I mentioned, just to recap, we invest broadly into the areas of IoT, robotics, AI, and AR/VR. So these are the four enablers that we are pretty agnostic in terms of the sectors that we go into. So my companies, I think mainly most of them, it's quite a mix, like 50% of them is in consumer when it comes to hardware. So actually, Focus Tech Ventures, we have invested also into pure ICT companies. So hardware-wise, the first couple of investments, maybe I can start off just introducing a couple. I remember the first one that we invested in is actually this company called T-Ware. Right? Actually, it's not an investment. It's pretty much I was one of the founding members of that company. So T-Ware was actually a wearables company. So it's enabled by haptics technology. So it was 4 years of deep research in NUS, Singapore, and University of Singapore, and also Keio University. So what they were doing is a jacket that helps individuals with sensory integration issues. So like PTSD, autism, for example. And I think we started to look at this company, the potential of this sensory integration market. We thought that the application is interesting because it was a growing market. The number of guys having, people having autism is actually pretty high. And we thought that it's a very useful application to showcase our haptics capabilities. But of course, the challenges, it took us about 3-4 years to get from concept to, after multiple iterations, to get to a point that we are commercial ready. Recently, we raised another round. We are moving into becoming a full-fledged consumer product as well. So it's like the world's first massaging jacket. So that's one of the first companies. And then, of course, just I briefly mentioned about Vibes, which is a remote vibrator. So again, it's about putting smarts into anything that you can think of. So a few consumer companies kicked off my interest, actually, in connected hardware. And now, this year, we actually started to incorporate a new fund, as I mentioned, with a few partners called TMB. And that's where we are now more interested in how, I think, it's not about a new class of consumer electronics or consumer hardware, but it's more of taking all this existingly commoditized hardware, put them together, make them operable, and then apply it towards a specific use case.
So, how many of you are looking for funds or have a hardware startup or planning to do a hardware startup or the sort of, how many of you? Okay, so probably for all of you, this question comes up. So, Kelvin, as an investor, what are the 3 key aspects that you look for when investing in a hardware technology startup?
So I think like any investments, it's a 3 broad categories. I think team, just now I think one of the panelists mentioned about team. In hardware, I think it's a bit more important because you need to have a multidisciplinary team when you scale up at some point in hardware, at least in connected hardware. So for a start, of course, you don't have a lot of money. It's like friends and family putting in money and whatnot. So I think for a start, it's usually when your CEO has to double as the the BD guy, the product owner, do everything on your own, right? And then your CTO is pretty full stack, so it's like it's able to look at hardware, software. So over time, I think you start to realize that you have to get external support, ID, ME, firmware. So that's where I think team dynamics, I think, is very important. Usually when we come in and talk to most entrepreneurs, I think it's about not just that product itself, like that one product, but if they are a consumer company, I think we will look at their long-term vision of how they want to attack this category. And is there a way to turn maybe their strategies to turn their one-time sale into a digital connected service kind of model. So we actually want to look at companies that has that long-term horizon, so there's a long-term vision. But at the same time, of course, he has to be very clear when it comes to us about how they want to execute their first runway.
So I think we've had this conversation before a couple of times, and why are majority of the VCs or investors not interested or not ready to invest in hardware startups? And you see a lot of investments going in for software startups. So, I mean, we understand certain basic reasons, but do you see, what do you think are the major reasons?
Okay, so the last, if I use Singapore as one example, I think the last 4-5 years has been all about digital media, about ICT, right? And a lot of the well-funded companies are mainly in pure software. So engineering, I think now is coming back one full circle. So I do see this whole cycle. If you look at every 10 years, right? I mean, from how the mainframes is disrupted by, let's say, the software, Microsoft was dominant, and moved into Google, and to search. And from there, you start to spawn social media, cloud computing. I think it's now, if you look at the every 10-year cycle, now is a good time, 2016, from iPhone was about 2006, I think, so about 10 years. It's a good time for us to think about how to take all these technologies that are quite mature right, at this point, to come into applying this to a new category, which technically IoT, for example, is not a technology. It's like when you set up a fund, you say invest in internet. That's probably very broad, but a lot of business models can evolve from there. So again, like IoT, robotics, new computing platforms like this, there's a lot of potential. So I think a lot of the entrepreneurs, a lot of the investors, when they talk about, I want to invest in a hardware company, if they only think about it from just a dumb piece of hardware, let's say a medical device perspective, then yes, definitely I think there's a lot of challenges, FDA, long cycles. But if you think of it as, again, putting together a product that has the hardware element, which could be easily created, I would say easily, but more commoditized, in a certain way, but driving your whole business model around software, I think that's where the part that I think particularly I'm more interested in at this point.
Okay. So I think this is like a slightly tricky question. What would you recommend a startup to go behind, crowdfunding or VC funding?
A lot of companies, I think crowdfunding, personally I think crowdfunding is a good platform to get started. I'm not sure whether is there like a fatigue now where, because I back a lot of, personally I like gadgets, so I kind of like back a lot of cool stuff, on Kickstarter, Indiegogo. But personally, I'm not sure whether there's a fatigue there, because you do see horror stories of companies failing to deliver and whatnot. But crowdfunding, as from an investor point of view, of course, you have validated demand through crowdfunding. It's a good proof of validation, as a validation point for us. But again, if you are looking to bypass crowdfunding, but you can show the same amount of traction, to me, I think it's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. So is it a good idea to go for crowdfunding first, prove the need in the market, and then get a funding from a VC or an angel?
So for a start, if you're looking at, so cash flow in hardware is the most important thing. I think this is overarchingly, you need to have cash flow, because from stage to stage, even if you talk about getting an early friendly CM to come in and help you, there's this thing called non-recurring engineering costs, which is quite expensive. Unless, of course, if they invest in you, there'll be different structures. But you need cash. So for a start, I think crowdfunding can really help you get to that validation point, but not necessarily you are able to execute just based on crowdfunding money. So for example, Pebble is one example, right? So they raised, like 10 mil in the first crowdfunding campaign, but they have to go out and raise another 15 mil just to make sure that they pay for NRE, get the toolings up, get all the early inventory, settled. So I think it kind of come hand in hand. You're talking about consumer products. If it's more B2B hardware, then of course it's about getting as many of these paid pilots and getting a kind of a seed round coming in. So there are different kind of structures you can think about. And of course now if you look at consumer hardware, there's also this, I think, debt portion that some of the banks are coming in. So if you can prove certain kind of, I would say, inflection point, then maybe some of the alternative ways of capital can come in to support the project.
So I think one last question, and I'll open it up to the audience. So what do you think are a couple of common mistakes which hardware startups make, or where are areas where they make a mistake and which lead to either failure or they have to pivot, or where do you think major mistakes made?
Okay, if I were to rank it, I think the first big mistake that maybe entrepreneurs in the hardware space may make is not having done enough research into that space. I know, people don't just, in software, there's always this, just go and do it, just throw it out there, see whether it sticks. But I think in hardware, it's a little bit more tricky because first you have to get that early prototype out to test. And this early prototype can be an ugly looking one, as I mentioned, stitched together, but sometimes that feedback loop isn't as iterative as software. So because of this, I think it pays to actually spend more time in the research phase. That means we're talking about, just I think one of the gentlemen was talking about trying to build another Microsoft Surface, right, kind of product. If you have done your research into certain areas that's actually pretty crowded, actually there's a lot of $1 billion thrown into that sector, that could be one food for thought for you. Are you able to position your product differently against the rest? So number one, I think, is not building. Number one failure reason is that you're not building something that the market wants. And I think the second part would be the management of cash flow, in my opinion. So I think this is also quite related to making mistakes along the way when it comes to manufacturing and whatnot, because if you fail to validate your market well, you start to go the wrong path, you start to run out of cash, and when you want to now raise another bridge round to start to kickstart the new idea again, the new pivot into another area, it becomes painful. So managing cash flow, I think, is important. And then the final thing is, I think, try not to build that perfect product. I think as engineers, it's like there's always this desire to build that perfect product. But it's always about this iterative cycle. I think it's important. Just go out there and build something, progressively validate your assumptions, and then come back and improve. If really there's something, if you know, in hardware, I think a lot of the cost is all sunk up front, right? To make a change when it's early stages, design stage is still okay. But once you tool up, I think it's very expensive to make running changes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kelvin.